Today, the main technique I'm going to show you is how to knit in the round on 2 needles. And I don't mean magic loop method, I mean 2 needles like these. To make it a little more interesting, I thought we'd go ahead and make a market bag. This is a plastic market bag knit out of grocery store plastic bags. If you haven't made your own yarn out of plastic bags before, I'm going to show you really quickly how you can do that. This is the one way I do it. If you look online, you will find hundreds of ways that people do this. I start out by cutting, and don't use your good sewing scissors for this. You really don't need it once you get started. It will just go along. I start by cutting one of the handles off at the base. And then I start cutting around in a spiral. And it's pretty easy to cut. You can pretty much just pull it against the scissors. You could use a sharp knife if you're adept with a pocket knife. I always just use the scissors. When I get to the other handle, I go ahead and cut across and use that handle so that I'm using the whole plastic bag. And you can see that the plastic material is kind of raggedy looking. It does not have to be perfect. All these were cut in the same way. You kind of roll it up as you go. As you knit it, it bunches up, and so you don't see that it's not perfectly cut and that it has raggediness. I try to make sure that it's at least 1 inch wide as I go. If it gets up to 2 inches wide, that's fine. You don't want it a lot thicker than that because it'll make a heavier plastic yarn when you're working with it. And I just spiral on around until I finish the whole bag. I don't like to wind it into a ball on my ball winder. You can just do it the old-fashioned way. Make your own core and let it roll. You can also use an old medicine bottle as the core. Just tuck the edge into the medicine bottle and wrap around it, and then you end up with a center pull ball. Okay, now you can see it takes more than one bag to make the market bag. In fact, here what I've done is use different colored bags to make stripes. And each one of these stripes is probably about 1 bag. So depending on how deep you want to make your market bag, that's how many bags you need to prepare. And you can see it's kind of fun to use different bags from different locations, different times of years to get the different color patterns, different color variations. Let's go ahead and start our market bag. And I'm going to start with a different roll of plastic that I had already made previously. And the first thing we're going to do is cast on 64 stitches. I'm going to cast them on normal long tail cast on. And here I'm just estimating how much I will need. Since I'm going to cast on 64 stitches, I'm going to wrap 20 times. So that's about how much will be 20 stitches. I want 60, so 20, 40, 60, and I want 64, so I'll make it a little bit longer, and that's where I'll start my long tail cast on. And there are lots of places, if you're not familiar with the long tail cast on, there are lots of places you can look that up that will probably be easier to tell than how I'm working on these needles. And this is not as easy to work with as yarn, obviously. You'll want to keep some hand cream nearby. Some of it is more flexible, some of it is less. It depends completely on what bag you start with, how you end up. You especially don't want to cast on too tight, because this plastic really does not give very well. Okay, so here I've run short, but no fear, any other time you'd have to tear out and start over or find another technique to continue. But in this case, I can just find another ball of similar yarn and attach it. Attach just a little length of it here. And I just always tie it in a knot. Good slip knot pulled tight. And those tuck to the inside of the bag and never show. Just has to be careful that they don't get caught in that stitch when you're doing the cast on. Okay, so we have 64 stitches, and you can see my needle is very full, and that seems like it might be a problem at first, but it is not a problem. In fact, after I do my first section of stitching, that's just tying off that other end of that bit that I added. Once you work your first full row in the round, it becomes much easier to work with this number of stitches on the needle because they stagger themselves. And so here's how you do it. It's not very tricky at all. The way you do it is you knit one. There we go, knit one, slip one, purlize, knit one, slip one. Now this of course works with any yarn, not just with plastic yarn. This just happens to be what I'm using to show you because this is a pattern that I specifically designed using this technique. It's really important that you don't make mistakes on these first rows. If you do, you're going to have to tear it out and start over. Or tear back, because there's really not a way to fix it. And you can see this is not easy to work with, especially I cast on just a little bit tight. I've always been a bit of a tight knitter, and I can't emphasize how much it helps if you are not a tight knitter. Now when you finish the needle, you feel like you have finished the row. But since you're knitting in the round, you really have not. This time, every stitch that you knit last time, you slip, and the ones you slipped last time, you knit. As you can see, I'm running short on yarn. So again, I do this a very fancy add-on of just tying it into a slip knot and pulling it good and tight. And you can see it's kind of almost around. There's a very pronounced structure. You can see the purl bumps on both sides, the slipped and the knit stitches. And it's even a little more emphasized, I think, here in the plastic yarn. So after you finish that first full round, which is twice across, which is kind of feels like 2 rows, but it's really 1 row because you're knitting in the round, you'll start to feel, it also feels very bulky around because you're actually knitting a double thickness of the plastic material. All right, and then I continue on like this until I get to at least a good 2 inches of material. And I'll show you why I knit that far before I go ahead and put it on regular circular needles. And you might ask, why didn't you just start on circular needles and knit it together at the bottom? That is entirely possible. You can do that and still make the market bag, But the point of this is to show you that you can knit in the round on 2 needles. And this does make a very neat bottom. You don't have, you can see on the bottom of this bag that was made using this technique, there is a line where the cast on occurred, but you can barely see, if you're not an experienced knitter, you may not even be able to see quite where that cast on row is. It's right here. But it makes for a much neater bottom, a stronger bottom. It's flexible. It's actually a knit bottom, so it's flexible and strong. And of course it could be flexible and strong if you sew it together at the bottom, but in this case you're using multiple threads instead of one, so I think it's a little stronger. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish knitting this up to 2 inches. And then we can look at it again and I'll show you what to do going forward. Okay, I wanted to show from a little different angle again one more time the technique. So I'm starting here at the beginning of a needle and I have a purl bump here, so I slip that. And here I don't have a purl bump, so I knit that. And again, a purl bump, no purl bump, slip, knit, slip, knit. Now that I've knit a few rows, you can see it's looking really bulky. That's because it's double knit. I actually have 2 thicknesses of fabric here. And it can also get a little dicier about how to turn the corner when you get to this edge. You can see that last stitch was slipped before, so I'm going to knit it. And I just pull it around the outside edge and in, and pull it up snug. There's nothing really fancy there, except you just don't want to leave a lot of slack. If you leave a lot of slack, there'll be laddering in your stitches there. And you can see that the definition is very distinct now. That's clearly one I should slip. That's clearly one I should knit. And if I open it up a little bit and let you see into the camera a little, you can see there's actually a tube. You can see I can put my finger in through between the two bits of knitting, between the two layers of double knitting. Now you can see, this is my all on one needle. You can see I've got a little more than an inch, and I just wanted you to see how that looks while you're knitting it. Still, it's kind of a big chunky thing to have in your hand, but that's okay. And here I'm turning the corner again. This first stitch is one that I need to knit. Slip and knit and slip. And as I do that, I think you can see inside there's a really long tube. Again, my finger is in there, inside of that tube. All right, and then knit and stitch. It's considerably looser than my cast on, so it's a lot easier going. Also, it kind of depends on what bags you decided to use. Grocery bags are a little thinner than department store bags, for example. But you can see I'm still just doing the same thing. And on both sides I have this tube. In between, and that will be the bottom of my market bag.